welcome to Matchmove for Production by VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this video we'll be moving on to shot MM004. What we'll do first, we'll just play through this shot so we can see what we're going to track, then we'll open 3DEqualizer. So 3D is opened up, and you can see our UI is opened up in our basic user interface. If you're not seeing this, if you go to the bottom left and click on Environments and click on Basic, it should set your UI up to this. If you're seeing something like this, just go to Environments and click Basic. So first thing that we need to do is load in our image sequence. So if you haven't downloaded the data package, you can still follow through. It's fine if you have your own stuff, but it's highly advantageous if you do, because then you can follow this through and get exactly right, and you can have all the data for your showreel and other stuff that you want to use it for later on past match moves, whether if you're doing this for a match move reel, or if you're doing it purely because you want the data to track it and put some CG assets into it. Okay, cool. So what we'll do first, we select our camera and we go over to our live action footage. And if you're not seeing that, it could be because you're in one of the other tabs. So make sure you're in your camera tab and click on live action footage and click browse. And we want to navigate to our data package. We'll go to robot chess, go to plates, and we'll select robot chess BJ1 and click OK. So as you can see, it's coming quite dark because it's already transcoded to a linear color space. So first of all, what we need to do is go to our 8-bit color conversion over in our camera tab and open it up. Then what we can do is change our gamma to 2.2. Now we can see it in more of a better view space. So like always, we can't really play through at the moment. It's very jittery, so what we need to do, we need to export our compression file out first. So if we go to, but before we do that, we need to save it. So if we go to 3DE4, then the bottom left, click on it and go save project as, and I'll just make a folder in here. You can put it wherever you like, but it's good to keep it all together so you don't get it all mixed up. So what I'll do first, I'll just make sure I name it the exact same as the image sequence naming. So if we do get confused or you don't know what it is, you always know that this is related to this shot. Cam video 1. Cool, so we save that. Then we want to go to playback, then export our buffer compression file. And this could take a while, so I'll probably fast forward it. Cool, so now that's exported out, the next step would be to do is we import our buffer compression file back in. So this will be much quicker. So now if we press spacebar, we can play through and see what our camera action is. Cool, so it's another handheld. So now we've got that in, we will now want to set up our lens parameters. So if we open up our camera data sheet, you can see we've not really got, purposely getting less and less data so we can start working stuff out, because a lot of the time you don't get data, so we're slowly working towards just having no data. So if we go to our lens, excuse me, and if we get our sensor size, which is our film back width and film back height, but if we just do our height and leave our film back width as passive, it should automatically fill out the correct values. So if we go into here and type in 11.88, but make sure you put millimeter, otherwise it will translate straight over to centimeters. And because we don't know the focal length, we'll leave it as that is for now, and we'll figure that out in a second with our lineup. So we've done that now. We've got our correct film back. So next thing we need to do, we need to import in our set geo. So if we open up our point group at the top left and go to 3D models and right click and add new and import OBJ file. If we go to data, set geo, and robot chest scan, you'll notice that this one is a scan, so this could be a little bit heavier, so it might take a while to import in. Okay, so that's loaded in. Can't see anything because we're in the F2 menu, so if we press F5, as you can see, it should have loaded up, and our camera's currently in the origin, so we see it in a bit of a... We don't see much. So first thing we want to do is if we click center models, we sort of see more of our scan, and if we hold shift and left click and rotate round, we can sort of see our benches. It's quite difficult to see as it is, so because now we're working with more of a scan situation, not a low res set geo, we can go to our 3D model tab, and if we select our scan data in our 3D models at the top left, we can go to our alpha tab here where it says 0.32, and we can reduce this down quite a bit so we can see a bit more of the plane. So if we hold shift and middle mouse click and try and get this lined up roughly using our shift and mouse buttons, we can sort of get a rough idea of the lineup. It's not going to fit perfectly because we don't quite know what the focal length is at the moment. So what we'll do, we'll just do this rough lineup. Then if we go to our texture mapping and UV map, we'll bring in our texture. So if you go to texture and robot chest scan via 1 TIFF, and click OK. Now if we turn off show lines and we show polygons, we should now get our textured representation of our scene. So now we have that. If we go to F2, we want to start doing our single frame lineup. So we're going to create single tracking points without actually tracking them. So if we pick points that we can see on the scan, so let's go for some solid areas. So let's go for this corner in the bench. So if we zoom in on here, and if we hold control and click left click on your mouse and just make a tracking point, you don't need to track it, just leave it where it is, and we'll pick somewhere else that's easily recognizable, and we'll do it on the other side as well. So if we hold control and left click, and we can do some over here, control left click on this bit of the chair post, and we control left click where it's missing a slat, and we'll do control left click on here because we might be able to pick up some of these textures on here, and maybe even some on the floor. Some of this might have moved, so we might have to change it up. So if we just pick this pebble here, and if we pick this bit here, in fact that looks like it'd be a good bit. So we've made 7 points, so if we select our first one and press F5, and we can go between F2 and F5, we want to click extract our polygon. You should get a zebra line, and you want to try and click in it and get that point so it's as close to that corner as possible, so you have a little green cross. That little green cross is surveyed that 2D point into its 3D space. So now if we go through and do that for everyone, so we go to F2, and our second one is the same corner but the opposite side, so if we go F5 and click extract polygon and try and get it in that corner as close as possible. F2, select our third one. So our third one is on this edge of this post, so we go to F5, and we can't see it because it's not there, so we can change this. So if we just switch between F5 and F2, we can see other areas that we can use instead. So I'm going to switch this point, so with it still selected, I can still left click and move it around. So if I pick this little white splodge here and go to F5, go to and switch between F2 and F5, I can sort of see that this point possibly is that point there. So if we go to click extract polygon, we select that point there, go back to F2, and we'll go to this point, and so we go to F5 and see what we got. So we can see it here. So if we click extract polygon, place it in that position, go to 5. So 5 is this little splodge on the arm. I think we can just about see it here on the scan. So if we click extract polygon, select that there, go to F2. Okay, so we've got this bit on the ground. We can see this little trio of rocks and this big one and this cigarette butt. So, and we can sort of see it here, this trio of rocks, the big one and the cigarette butt. And we're currently on this one, so if we click extract polygon, we'll get to that rock. We'll go for 7. It's quite hard to see, but I think that's probably this splodge here. So click extract polygon. So we've extracted it, and if we press Alt and C and solve our position, we can probably see it's not done a very good lineup. So what we can do first is if we go to our lens, and because we don't really know the focal length, we've left it as 30, but what we can do, we can go to fix, change this from fixed to adjust. And if we go down to our windows and go to parameter adjustment window and open that, you'll see that we've got a focal length parameter adjustment window. So if we change brute force to adaptive, and if we click adjust, this will sort of this will figure out what's the best fit focal length for our survey points. So if we transfer parameters, it's jumped in, and if we press Alt C, we flip between, we can see that the lineup's pretty much almost there already. And it solved it as an 18mm. So we kind of can see it's at an 18mm. So because we've figured out its focal length, what we can do, we can bring in an 18mm lens grid, so we can try and get some distortion for it already without having to solve it. So now we've got our rough focal length. What we'll do is if we go up to our cameras at the top left, and if we right click where it says on the highlighted yellow for our active camera, if we right click, click add new, and go reference camera, it should create a reference camera here. And this basically means that we can stick our lens grid on it. It's just for a single frame, and it brings the data over onto our sequence camera. So if we select and highlight our reference camera, then we go to browse, so we've created a reference camera, and what this does, this will mean that we can put our lens grid onto this, and then it will automatically transfer its parameters over to our sequence camera. So if we double click on this, make sure our reference camera is highlighted and activated. Then if we go over to browse, if we go to robot chest data, if we select a lens grid, we go to the lens grids that we have. If we click off sequence view, we can select our 18mm lens grid here. If we click OK, we need to go to F3. So pressing F3 goes to our distortion grid menu, and you should have this little red matrix in the middle. So what you need to do, if you click and drag this top left one, you'll see that a little zebra line pops up. And if you just click and drag it and let it snap to the corner, it will automatically pop in between these corners. So if you then do it for just these three, you can do them all, depending on how good your lens grid, you might have to do them all manually, but because this is shot fairly well, we can just click snap here and it will pop everything into the correct place. So if we hold Control and press up, we'll start adding more rows to our central column. If we do that all the way to the top and hold Control down to do all the way to the bottom, and we need to fill it left and right, so if we hold Control left, keep tapping it until we fill out the lens grid, and hold right, and keep tapping it until we fill it out. And you want to fill this lens grid so it's completely covered. If you go over, it doesn't matter because these will be greyed out and they won't be active, but if you want to delete them, if you hold Shift and press right, that will delete them. So now we've filled out our lens grid, we need to calculate our distortion for it. So if we go up to the top here where it says Calc and click on it and click Calc Distortion and Camera Geometry, and we don't need to change anything here, we can just leave it as it is. All we need to do is click Calculate Lens Parameters. You've got a nice low pixel deviation, which is good. And if we set parameters and close, nothing will have happened, but if we click between undistort, we see the amount of distortion that's been removed from the plate. So now we're pretty much done with the lens grid now. We can double click on our sequence camera to reactivate, so it brings us back to the menu, brings us back to the correct camera view, sorry. And if we click between the two, we can see the amount of distortion that's being taken off the plate. So now if we go back to our F5 menu, and we press Alt-C and resolve, because it's slightly shifted position, but we're getting a better lineup now. So what we can do, we can go around, try and get some more. We can just double check that is. If we zoom in and look at the ground, because we can get it pretty close, and even looking at that, that's very close. So if we actually go to 3D models, we don't actually need this texture on here anymore. So if we go to 3D model and select our scan, we can click show lines and click off show polygons. So now we're only seeing the wireframe, we're not seeing the texture. So now we can get a better idea of how this scan is lining up. So the lineup is the most important thing, and the closest we can get, the better our solve will be. So if we look around all our edges, some edges may not be as perfect, but it's best average. It should look very close. But for something like this, we can probably adjust this. But first, before we adjust anything, let's do a quick focal length adjustment. Now we've added the distortion, because that will probably slightly change. Resolve that for Alt-C. See how it's shifted it a little bit. But you can sort of see this edge here. It's not quite perfect, so what we can do, if we make sure we got no points selected by pressing Alt left click, so we've got nothing selected, and if we click Extract Vertex, so this is the exact same thing as the Extract Polygon, and if we hold Control and left click, we've made a lineup point, which means we can drag the position of our geo. So what we can do, we can pull this line up a little bit closer, sort of get this curve matching around here. What we can do, then we can select our point there, that's there, and reproject it back on the model. So now we've done a little adjustment and we've projected that back onto the position, and if we press Alt-C, it's a little bit closer. It's not perfect, but what we can do is do another little focal length adjustment, then Alt-C and just what we can do the same up here. If we make sure nothing's selected. Click extract vertex and hold control and left click. We can pull this all in a little bit tighter. So this curve's matching, or this curve's round here is matching. Because the premise of this is there's going to be, the idea was that there's two robots playing chess. So the tightest area you want for lineup is at least the seat and the ground. So if we get that close, and what we can do, we can select this point. If we go edit, project point back onto 3D model. And what we can do, if we go back to F2, and if we create another point, control left click here, press F5. So we're pretty happy with this lineup. So if you select this point and go edit, project onto 3D model, click OK, we've made another point and projected it there. So if we hold Alt and C to resolve, that's going to help it lock it in place a little bit more. So what we'll do now, we'll just do one more focal length adjustment. We'll clear that, click adjust, it's slightly moved, and we'll just solve that again with Alt C, and you can see we've got a pretty good lineup across everything. I'm quite happy with that. So if we store our pose, this has now made a little red keyframe here, so 3D always remembers it, but we'll also keep our single frame survey just in case we lose it, because store pose, recall pose is next to each other, but then also remove pose, which is too close to bring it back. So we'll always keep this just in case we lose it. So we don't need these lineup points anymore. We can select both of them and press delete, and we can delete the two selected points. So now if we select all of our points, if you select top one and shift, left click all the way down, right click and add new point set. We'll call this SF for single frame. And if we do the same again, select all our points, hold top one and shift left click, then click and hold the middle mouse roller and drag it under SF. And what we can do, if we right click on here and go to modify, calculation and disable them, we want to make sure they're disabled, otherwise they will cause havoc with our solve later. If we go view and hide selected points, so we don't want to see them either. So now we've done our lineup, we want to save it, but because now we've got a scan in here, like I always say, we always need to make sure, no matter what, it's on reference only. So it's going to be a little bit different now because we have a scan in it. We've done it for all the other ones, so this should just be a habit that you do every time. So make sure that your geometry is on reference only, otherwise it could take a long time for you to open up your files. So, especially with a scan, because this is going to be a hell of a lot of data for it to open. So, now we've done that, let's save it. And I'll just overwrite, you can version up. Now if we go back to F2, I'm going to start tracking some points. What we can do, we can go to View, click on Show FOV, and that'll get rid of our field of view lines and our lens center markers. So what we'll do, we'll start picking points that we can track nicely. This first frame's a little bit blurry, so maybe let's just start from the last frame. So select that point. Gauge marker, because there's a lot of detail in here. A lot of the time the automatic sizing of a tracking marker is pretty much perfect. So if we gauge marker, click track, and it's bouncing around a lot, so we need to make sure we're on center 2D so we can see that it's tracking nicely. And we'll just pick something here as well. Gauge marker and track. Pick one more bit for the floor. Let's get this one here. Gauge marker and track. And I'm always tracking from the first to the last frame, just because it's easiest to do. You can track from the middle, but that means you have to track backwards as well. So if we always start from the first frame or start from the last frame, it just makes your life a lot easier. So let's pick something on this bench. So let's pick this corner. We don't want to track anything in the background because there'll be parallax between that. So if we make sure that we're always tracking something that's always in our sort of area of tracking, we don't want any background, we just want foreground. So if we click gauge marker and click track, can see how much the background is shifting. We don't want any of that in our tracking marker. We'll do this for a few bits. We can track this little petal here. So if we click gauge marker and track, let's track something on this bench as well. Let's do this corner, gauge marker, track. Let's get some bits on this bench. Let's get this bit here. Gauge marker and track. Let's get some on this back as well. Let's get this center bit. See how it's selecting some of the background. So we want to make sure we get none of this background. Let's keep it fairly central so we didn't get anything in the gaps. We can click gauge marker and track. Let's do this bit here. Let's resize it so we don't get any of the background. Gauge marker and track. And let's just do the other side as well for safety. And gauge marker, track. So even though we only need a minimum of 6, we always go past 6. Always do more. You don't have to do absolutely loads. More can be worse, but you don't want to do the absolute minimum. So if we select all our points and have a look at our spread, we've got a pretty good spread of points. So what we can do, if we press F5, if we go to this little red key where we've stored our pose, and with scans, they can be a little bit dodgy because they'll have holes in, so we need to make sure that we're definitely projecting onto something that's not got holes. So let's go to edit, project points onto model. We'll do this one by one so we can definitely double check that these are projected into the correct place, because there could be holes in this. So if we select our point, we can see that's projected onto this floor and it's in the correct place. So now if we go through them all, edit, project points onto 3D models, edit, project points on the 3D models, and we can just go to F6 and just double check they're projected onto the floor, and they are. You can see one here, and one here. So where's this one? This is the corner of the bench, so if we go edit, project points on the 3D models, F2, where's that one? That's the little petal. Project points on the 3D model. Let's just do the rest of them all at once, and we'll check after. So we select them all, go edit, project points on models. We've got 3 or 4 that's projected, so one of them hasn't. So we'll just go have a look at that and project that onto the model. Cool, that's there. So if we select them all, and we press F6, we can see that all our points are in the correct place. So we've got one here on the corner in the center. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So if we go back to F5, so now we've projected all these points. If we press Alt-C, this calcul graph will come up and it will show the calculation of the camera solve, which have little red dots, are keyframes. and our yellow points are our 3D representation of our 2D points that we've surveyed. So if we click use result, somehow I've clicked, if we go to basics, somehow I've clicked that. Sorry. So we get to F5, and if we play through, we can press Alt and left click to deselect our points, press play on our spacebar, and we can see what our solve's doing. And the solve looks really good. Well, the next thing we want to do is address what's happening in our deviation browser. So if we click on our deviation browser and go show point deviation curves, click active points only, we can take a look at some of the points that are causing us some issues, and this one's definitely one. Before we do anything though, we will do a focal length adjustment. So if we clear that and go adjust, nothing's changed. So possibly it's projected because it's quite a rough scan. It could be projected in a wrong depth. So if we right click on this, if we go modify survey free, let's survey free at first and press Alt C and see if that relaxes the solve. So that's now not pulling anything off this, and it's relaxed into its soft place. So now if we edit and project it back into the same place, it'll probably do the same thing, but it's done the opposite now. So if we, because now we've projected it, and if we now go to that point and go to modify survey and approximately survey it, press Alt C, we're going to give it a little bit of wiggle room for it to sort of relax in, and that's brought that all the way down. And we'll select this point here, let's see what that's doing. If we survey free this, press Alt C, it's relaxed everything. So if we go back and project it back onto the 3D model, then right click and approximately survey it, press Alt C, and now we've got a pretty good solve. Got a nice flat average line. Our deviation is really low. Our lineup's pretty much perfect. So what we'll do, we'll just do one more focal length adjustment. We'll clear that and adjust. It's changed by 1 point of millimeter. So we'll solve again with Alt C. And if we can click full frame, press spacebar, and we can see we've pretty much got a perfect track. Cool, so that's pretty much it. So now what we need to do, we need to export all our cameras, our lens distortion node and our undistorted plate. So if we press spacebar and pause that, what we might want to do is save it. So if we go save project as, and I'll just save it over. I'll just overwrite. So the first thing we'll do, we'll export a project. If you go to 3D for export project Maya 2.5, we want to export this at the start frame of the exact start frame of the image sequence. So ours is 1001. If we export file, and I'll just put this in the same place as I've put my other ones, but you need to make sure that you call it the same name as the image sequence, so you know that your exports are corresponding to this plate. So I've just called it the image sequence name underscore camera via 1. And if I click OK and click OK on that, and that's that exported. So the next thing is we go File, Export Nuke LD 3D4 Lens Distortion Node. This is a distortion node for our compositors that will reapply the distortion back onto our CG once they finish their comps. So if we call it the same, yes. Nuke LD node. OK. And now our next thing to do is export our undistorted plate. So if we go 3DE, run warp 4, and you should have this window open. So if we click down here to our warp footage, we'll see there's no image available. So if we click preview, we can flick between two and see the amount of difference it makes that we remove distortion from the image. So now if we go to our destination footage and click save footage, we'll leave it as OpenEXR because it's a linear, it's transcoded into a linear color space. But what we'll do, we'll change our scale to 50%. So if we preview that again, and now we want to go to browse, we go to VFX shoot and go to our where you want to export your undistorted plate. So I'll make a new one, call it robot chess PG01 UDP, and I'll just I'll select that, right click and copy that, because I'm going to type it again. We'll go into this folder. You want to make a new folder because it will make a load of images, and you probably don't want that. We'll call it UHD. And we need to make sure that you put .4 hashes .EXR, otherwise it won't read it as an image sequence. So if you don't do that, it will just render off one image. So if you click OK, and if you click render, and you should get some little green bars appearing down at the bottom. And it'll probably take a while, so I'll just fast forward this. Cool, and that's done. So all we need to do now is go File, Exit, and if you haven't already, save it. And we're pretty much done in 3D. Now next thing to do is bring it into Maya and set it all up.
If you guys enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.